reference to, of course, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which has now been introduced. And coming to our topic today, I would like to restrict it and have a discussion on how these, couple of offenses like abatement of suicide, attempt to suicide, pardon, this is the wrong heading, the attempt to commit suicide, or even when it comes to in relation to a new section which is being introduced in BNS, that also we'll discuss. So we'll see the transition between how what is there in the IPC, have there been landmark judgments in the IPC, and then related to BNS, see the changes that have come into BNS. So without any delay, we can go ahead and start with the section. So I wanted to show you initially just the section in itself. It is there as it is in BNS. And the section is it's just a set of few lines which talks about abatement of suicide. It states that abatement of suicide is if any person commits suicide, whoever abets the commission of such suicide shall be punished with imprisonment of either term of a description which may extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine. So, not a very extensive definition, not a very large section, a limited section with limited aspects within it, right? So, within this particular offense, whether you deal with it under 306 or under BNS, what is the nature of the offense? It is cognizable in nature, it is non-bailable, and also it is non-compoundable in nature. The punishment, as we have already discussed, is 10 years, and it is tried in the Sessions Court. So this is just a little bit of information about how is the section applied and in which court is it tried and what is the punishment that is given for this particular section. Now coming to the main essence of the section has mainly two parts apart from the punishment that it provides. It states that if any person commits suicide, now any person, the term is again neutral, so can be anybody, commits suicide. Now, suicide as a term is not defined. It is not defined in IPC, it is not defined in BNS. So we go with the general definition of this particular term, which in the journal that I was referring to, that in Law and Medicine, is the act of taking one's own life. But in a more specific way, it is the deliberate act. That is a more better way of putting it forward, that suicide is the deliberate act of taking your own life or ending your life. It can also be said to be the intentional act of taking your own life. So the first half of the section starts with saying where a person commits suicide, that is, takes their life either intentionally or deliberately or voluntarily. And then it goes on to say that whoever abates the commission of suicide, so the person who has abated or has encouraged the commission of such suicide of that other person, is said to have committed abatement of suicide. Now, abatement as a term is defined under IPC, and the same definition continues in BNS, right? It states that where a person either instigates any person to do that thing or engages with one or more other person or persons in any conspiracy for the doing of that thing, if an act or illegal omission takes place in pursuance of that conspiracy and in order to the doing of that thing, or thirdly, intentionally aids by any act or illegal omission the doing of that thing. Now, in short, in a crisp summary of this section, we can say abatement is the act of instigation or engaging with people in conspiracy to do an act or omission, right? Or it is intentionally aiding in doing some act which would have led to that particular offense, which in our case is the commission of suicide, right? So, abatement defined in IPC, section of abatement of suicide states that whoever abates the commission of such suicide. We have these three elements ready with us: instigation, engages in an act with another, or intentionally aids that particular act. Right. Now, we come to this discussion based on this particular case, because here we will understand the concept of what is instigation. We will understand what is the concept of how, when does it become relevant, when there is a suicide involved, when does it come under the ambit of abatement of suicide. So let's discuss this case. There is a person A, and he was working in a company where he had these bosses B, C, and D. Now, due to some reason, these bosses introduced a scheme of voluntary retirement, VRS, and they started forcing a set of their employees to take VRS, including A. A did not want this VRS, right? This particular set of accused continue to put pressure that he should, leave the job. Or in one specific meeting which took place, which was very important, in that meeting they said either you take VRS or you take another job of merchandising, which was like a lower category of work from what he was existingly doing at that moment doing. So in that situation, what happened is this person was under a lot of stress. Another thing is, with him were other friends or colleagues of his who were in the meeting also, where they were also told that they should be taking VRS or they will have to do a lower job. And all of these people who were present were told very unpleasant things by these set of superiors or employers about themselves. Now, this man A gets very upset and goes back to his hotel. And in the hotel, he shuts the door and he hangs himself. Now, what happens is the brother of this man A files a case and says that these people have abated this suicide because they had put a lot of pressure on him. They had made it impossible for him to live a peaceful life by giving only the option of retiring, or by saying that, you take this job of merchandising, which was below what he was at that particular point doing, right? So in this particular scenario, there was this interesting decision given by the court, and the court actually took out guidelines for abatement because there was so much vagueness. There was no understanding of how do you decide when a person has instigated suicide, in our case instigating the suicide of this particular employee, right? So the court in fact went into depth into the concept of abatement of suicide and introduced some very different aspects of what suicide can be, right? And how there are extensions to that particular discussion, and how relations play a very important role in that discussion. The court said that when suicide is the topic, or when suicide is committed, usually if abatement is there, there are two main relationships where abatement can take place. One is a personal relationship, the other is a professional relationships. So two facets were explained by the court and said that where there is a wife involved, so there is a intimate relation, or where there is blood relationship involved, like parents, your siblings, children involved, it can lead to psychological triggers, it can lead to distress, and that could in some situations also amount to an where a charge of abatement might come in. And professional relationships are also there, where there are some responsibilities on the individual which he has to fulfill, and in those scenarios there can be harassment which an employee faces, right? So this was very interesting because the Supreme Court itself highlighted that these are the two type of relationships in which we do see multiple cases of abatement of suicide coming in, right? So it highlights those relationships. And then, most interestingly, it asks these questions. It says that the court should have understood whether the accused have committed these kind of scenarios, and if these scenarios are there, only then is it abatement of suicide. If these scenarios are not fulfilled, if these questions don't get answered, then in that scenario, it is not abatement of suicide, right? So in this context, let us look at the questions. I know there are a lot of questions coming in the chat. I will answer, I will try to answer all of them if possible. I will come to attempting suicide, I will come to all of them. Please give me a chance to finish this part and I will definitely try to answer those questions. Okay, so coming back to the case, the court itself said these questions should be answered in the positive in case abatement of suicide has to be proven. So the first question that it puts forward is, on the date of the meeting, did the appellants, which is the accused, create a situation of unbearable harassment or torture, leading the deceased to see suicide as the only escape? To ascertain this, the two statements of the colleagues on the deceased referred to by us were sufficient. So they had asked the colleagues whether it was of that degree that the only option available to the deceased was to end his own life. Now, we must also remember that those two people were also sitting in the meeting, but they didn't take this step. Right. So the court is trying to hint towards this particular fact. Right. Was it so much torture? Were they speaking so badly that these people were all feeling like they should end their lives? Or was it only this one person that was feeling that way? This is one question. And that's why they referred to the two people. Then the next question, are the appellants accused of exploiting the emotional vulnerability of the deceased by making him feel worthless or undeserving of life, leading him to commit suicide? Please understand the question that they are asking. They are saying he must be made to feel worthless or undeserving of leading life. There is a difference between being made to feel worthless and undeserving, and so worthless and so undeserving that you don't want to live anymore, right? So the degree is different. What the court is trying to establish is this is not only abatement, it is abatement of suicide. You must be abating suicide. You must be creating a situation where the person does not want to live anymore. You must feel as worthless and undeserving to not want to live anymore. Next, the question is it a case of threatening the deceased with dire consequences such as harm to his family or severe financial ruin to the extent that he believed suicide was the only way out? So, again, another very relevant question, did they really create such a scenario where they were wanting him to depreciate in life, where he would have no financial stability or that his family members would be under threat? That is another question which should have been asked by the court, right? And lastly, is it a case of making false allegations that may have damaged the reputation of the deceased and push him to commit suicide due to public humiliation and loss of dignity? So, lastly, the court says, are they putting any false allegations on you? Are they creating a scenario where your reputation is damaged and therefore you don't want to live anymore? So, I will discuss the Atul Subhash case. Please wait on, right? So, all these four questions are very pertinent, which the Supreme Court asked and said, did the lower courts look into these parts or these aspects of this case? First thing, that are is the harassment to such a level that the deceased saw only suicide as an escape, right? Next, were they making him feel so bad that he didn't want to live life itself, worthless and undeserving of life? Was that the feeling they gave him? Thirdly, that did they threaten of any dire consequences to the family or any financial ruin to him? And lastly, did they really do anything to affect his reputation or make any such allegations? To all these four questions, especially the last one, third and fourth one, the answer is no. He may have felt worthless or undeserving, they may have been statement, but was that so worthless or undeserving that he didn't want to live anymore? Is the question. And can that be established that they did, their actions were such that it made him feel undeserving of life, or was it he individually felt that way, or the employer made him feel that way? This is the debate that finally comes, whether the employer did that, or is he personally sensitive enough to feel that way, is the question, right? And the first one, as we said, was suicide the only escape he had? Did the meeting become so unbearable that suicide was the only option which he saw? But remember, two other people were there, did not take those steps. So these four very pertinent questions asked, the court said actually 306 should not be applicable to these people. And while making this statement, it stated that the ingredients to constitute an offense under 306 of IPC would stand fulfilled if the suicide is committed by the deceased due to the direct and alarming encouragement, incitement by the accused, leaving no option but to commit suicide. Leaving no option but to commit suicide. It emphasized avoiding unnecessary prosecutions and requiring clear evidence connecting the accused's actions to the victim's suicide, right? So now the court is saying you have to not only prove that there was a very bad situation and then the person committed suicide, you have to prove that there was this bad situation was done in a way that it led to his death or his wanting to kill himself. It has to make him feel that way, that he has to commit his death. But we must look into the aspect here that they were running a company, and the company was taking steps which were not only for him but for many colleagues of his, and they were all facing the same pressure which maybe were relevant to that particular company, right? And some actions are the ones that the company has to take for its well-being, right? So were they really wanting, instigating this person A to kill himself, or were they just trying to run a company and take some steps in regards to the health of the company, right? So the court says, is it directly an encouragement? Again, going back to this particular word, that which I have highlighted, is committed by the deceased due to direct and alarming encouragement, incitement by the accused, leaving no option but to commit suicide. Did they do it in such a way that he had no option but to commit suicide? The court said no. It was not done in a way that he had only one option to commit suicide. He may have felt very bad. In fact, if you read the judgment, out of the colleagues, he was the only one sitting there and crying, even though all the other two members who were present and were witnesses in this case, they were there. They also faced the same issues, but it was him that they noted that he had started crying in the meeting itself. So sensitivity also plays a role, right? And as I said, the court is speaking about unnecessary prosecution of people, right? So these two main things, apart from mentioning the relationships, which is that professional and personal relationships are usually the places where you can see abatement of suicide charges can come in, were highlights which were introduced, and the questions which the court highlighted that the lower court should have asked when trying to establish abatement of suicide was relevant, was pertinent to this particular case. In fact, it is said that these are the guidelines which the Supreme Court has now introduced in this particular case. I will just go back to the case for you to read the name of the case and see: Nipun Aneja and others versus State of UP. And the citation is also there. The incident happened with Rajiv Jain, who was being forced to take VRS, right? So this is one case. Employers are charged with abatement of suicide. we will take another case now. This is the landmark case which has just come out in 2024. Another important case in this on this behalf. Yeah, this is the case that I'm taking right now. Jaydeep Singh and others versus State of Gujarat. Relevant case, latest case, court again says mere allegations of harassment are insufficient to establish guilt. For a conviction, there must be evidence of a positive act by the accused closely linked. It should be closely linked to the time of the incident that compelled and drove to commit suicide. Now, this is again a case where what happens? A is a female, she commits suicide, and a case is filed by her relative, let us say B, and B says, puts a charge of 498A cruelty and also abatement of suicide. Right. Now, when you look into the facts of the case, the argument put forward is that after 12 years of marriage, they felt that there was a lot of cruelty in the marriage. Other thing was said that 1 year ago, her Stridhan was sold by the husband. So 12 years of marriage, after which now after her passing, they have put a case of 498A. Second thing that they have said that 1 year ago, the husband has sold her gold ornaments, including her Stridhan. Court again says that there should be a link of time between the incident and for there to be abatement of suicide, right? It should be so closely related that it compelled and drove the victim to commit suicide. In this particular incident, the incident that they are pointing out is 1 year ago. Then how is it related to this lady's suicide today? Court said the nexus is not visible. Mere allegations of harassment are insufficient to establish guilt. We are not getting into the question of whether there was harassment or not. We are saying that was there sufficient harassment to today when she's passing away or when she's committing suicide to link her to this particular section, to charge her with this particular section. And the court repeats itself and says that these actions must be proximate to the time of suicide. You cannot bring in incidents which have happened years ago. And then also this perspective was also put in that when there is 12 years of marriage, after 12 years of marriage, why after her passing only the cruelty was introduced, or the discussion of cruelty was brought in after 12 years and after her passing. So the court felt that these were allegations of harassment, but they were insufficient for this particular section. Now coming to another case, and why this case is relevant is because it speaks about mens rea in the abatement of suicide, in the concept of abatement of suicide. So before we get into what the judgment was part of the relevant part of the judgment, we will discuss the facts of the case. There are 4 people. These 2 are elders, and these 2, C and D, are the son of B. Now, X is a female. She is the daughter of Y. A, B, and Y are cousins. Now, Y and A and B are constantly under litigation with each other. They are at odd ends. They are fighting with one another. So these set of families are fighting with one another. Now what happens is, in this case, these 4 keep troubling the daughter of Y. They say that she is going to become the wife of A. They start calling her terms like chachi and other relevant words which mean daughter-in-law, and hurtfully start teasing her. Who teased all these three T's, and this man himself also keep teasing her. This keeps happening consistently. She informs her mother and father repeatedly. They try to avoid getting into any confrontation with this full group, who continues whenever, wherever she's going. If she's going for any daily chores also, they continue to keep harassing her, keep making comments like this. And one day they take her into a room and say a lot of bad things to her, and again start making these comments that she is the wife of A, and so on and so forth. She comes back home, she tells her parents, especially her mother, and she's crying a lot, and they pacify her and they tell her that we will make a complaint against them. But however, what happens is both mother and daughter, they cry all night. Morning, before anything could be found out, X shuts the door and hangs herself. Now, this case is very pertinent as to whether there is abatement of suicide. And the court gave a very good decision. The court said these four people have committed abatement of suicide. The reason being, if we look into this whole situation, their only purpose of teasing her was to harass her. And they harassed her in such a way that there was a reaction from her, there was a response from her. When she was also locked into the room with them, she tried to respond to them, retaliate to them, however was unsuccessful. She has been constantly telling her parents. There is a frustration on that part, and the mother and her have been crying all night about the situation that they are in. In the morning, she kills herself in the room, right? The court gave a very good decision. The court said the question of mens rea on the part of the accused in such cases would be examined with reference to the actual acts and deeds of the accused. And if the acts and deeds are only of such nature where the accused intended nothing more than harassment or snap show of anger, a particular case may fall short of abatement of suicide. However, if the accused kept on irritating or annoying the deceased by words or deeds until the deceased reacted or was provoked, a particular case may be that of abatement of suicide. So the court is not completely committing. In the first half, it says an act may be mere harassment. An act may simply mean harassment, but there are certain situations where the harassment is such and it is so pointless that the only reason it is being done that there is some kind of reaction from the woman, and here they have used the word provoked. So repeating this, just this set of lines, which is very relevant. However, if the accused kept on irritating or annoying the deceased by words or deeds until the deceased reacted or was provoked, a particular case may be that of abatement of suicide. Such being the matter of delicate analysis of human behavior, each case is required to be examined on its own facts while taking note of all surrounding factors having bearing on the sections and psyche of the accused and the deceased. Right? So the court also accepts that every case is different and every will have to be dealt according to the facts of that particular case, but in this case, they did believe that these accused had committed abatement of suicide. Unlike the first case which we dealt with, the employee was being told by the employer of certain changes which were taking place in the company. Of course, it was not said in a very good manner, but they were doing only what was required for the company, which he took as harassment, could have been harassment to some extent, but not done with the intention of him to react or commit suicide. In this case, however, Ude Singh's case, they did this without any reason. They did it only so that there is a response from her. Unfortunately, the response in this case being that she ended her life. She felt that there is no other option to her but to end her life. So, with this discussion, before I go on to our next section, I want to Just repeat what we have studied. The section on abatement of suicide is simple. It starts with the first half, which says if a person commits suicide, any person who abates the commission of such suicide is said to commit abatement of suicide. So, what is abatement? The court has said it will be dealt with case to case. It also said that personal and professional relations do play a role, but the court also highlighted one part: it should have nexus. The harassment or the instigation, the encouragement, the incitement must be such that it must have left no other option with that person. The person must have felt so worthless that they feel that they should not be living, worthless to live life, not just worthless, worthless enough to feel that they should not be living. That extent has to be proven, and somewhere the mens rea of the accused is relevant. Why is he doing it? For what intention are they doing it? Is the question that comes in, right? So it's not enough ki okay, they were harassing and he commits suicide, so it is abatement to suicide. Why were they harassing? Was the harassment for the purpose of the person to feel so worthless that they don't want to live life and therefore they take the step? Is what you need to establish. All right. So that was 306, abatement of suicide. Continues into BNS also. But now we come to another section, which is attempt to commit suicide. Attempt to commit suicide has been removed from Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. It is no more there in this particular new legislation. It remains only in IPC. Section again is simple. Whoever attempts to commit suicide and does any act towards the commission of such offense shall be punished with simple imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 year or fine or with both. Right? So, just a short discussion on what is attempt to commit suicide. Person attempts is the word used, and what is mandatory, that an act is done by that person towards commission of such offense. Now, if you look at your the papers that come to you in your judiciary exams, whether it is the mains or whether it is the prelims, very often a question is asked on this part, on attempt to commit suicide, which is that whether an act is necessary. For example, if a person is trying to commit suicide by burning themselves, and when he's trying to light something to burn himself after putting kerosene, is the act which one tries to highlight as the act to attempt to commit suicide. So when you stop him at that time, he has committed an act which is for the purpose of committing suicide and could be charged under 309. So what is essential to understand: attempt to commit suicide doesn't really mean if I say that I want to commit suicide, I have not done any act for it, I have just declared it. An action is necessary to bring it under the ambit of 309. Some overt act is necessary. Now, another question which has been asked to you in the papers is that A and B, husband and wife, have a fight, they have a quarrel. B being the wife, after the quarrel, she decides she wants to jump into a well and die and starts running towards the well, and a person C stops her while she is running towards the well. Now, in the question, it has been asked that try to prove this is not attempt to commit suicide. Meaning, you will have to prove that this action of running is not an attempt. So the answer probably would be that an attempt and the act that is expected out of her is very close in nexus to her committing suicide, which is where she's standing on the well and so on and so forth. So these type of questions come wherein you are expected to answer in reverse as to why this is not attempt when she has already started running towards the well. It is specifically asked to you that prove that this is, or argue that this is not attempt to commit suicide. So this could be one of the arguments which is necessary. An act which is in close nexus to the commission of suicide would become an act to commit suicide, or when you attempt to commit suicide. So this is the section. This was there under 309. It is not there under BNS. Now, why is it not there? It is not there because this section has been under debate for a number of years. It started with the 42nd Law Commission report, where there was a suggestion that the section should be removed. The Delhi and Bombay High Court in 1985 and 87, respectively, also made statements that it is an unconstitutional section, because if a person is committing suicide, obviously they are not in a good state of mind. And if you can't make them punishable for the fact that they are under so much stress and trauma. So 85 and 87, Delhi and Bombay High Court have also passed judgments where they declare it unconstitutional. Following that, another landmark judgment is passed by the Supreme Court through a two-judge bench, where they declared that it is unconstitutional in the case of P. Rathinam versus Union of India in 1994. In 1996, this judgment is overturned by another landmark case called the Jian Kaur State versus State of Punjab case. In this case, in fact, the court says the right to life does not include the right to die. So you cannot declare this act of suicide to be, or the attempt to commit suicide to be, and within the ambit of right to die. They declared that it is not a part of it. Everyone's right to life is a blessed right and has to be enjoyed to its full extent. We don't have the right to take our own lives, is what the Jian Kaur versus State of Punjab case established. So again, this was like a crossroads for us. First half, we try to remove this section because it is unfair, because those people who are committing suicide mostly are doing it because they are unhappy, right? But then Jian Kaur versus State of Punjab states that you cannot do that. You cannot remove these sections as unconstitutional. Right to life does not include right to die. And so suicide does, or attempt to commit suicide does remain punishable, right? So because this Jian Kaur case happened, after that we see very soon the 156th Law Commission report came in. Now again, this was in favor of retaining attempt to commit suicide. But then in 210, the 210th Law Commission report, there was a statement that we should remove it, because the people who are suffering with this particular issues or with so much stress are the ones who are committing suicide, and they should not be made punishable for those things, right? And the 2010 LCR came in 2008, right? And then mainly what happened was the Mental Health Care Act of 2017. This basically decriminalized Section 309 by introducing 115 of the Mental Health Care Act. It clearly stated that notwithstanding anything contained in Section 309 of IPC, any person who attempts to commit suicide, now please understand, any person who attempts to commit suicide shall be presumed, unless proved otherwise, to have severe stress, and shall not be tried and punished under the code. So this is a declarative statement. This is a special law which has come out for mental health care, which is saying that 309 will not be applicable for people who attempt to commit suicide, and it will be presumed that they have severe stress. And in fact, in the subsection, next subsection, it states that the appropriate government shall have a duty to provide care, treatment, and rehabilitation to a person having severe stress and who attempted to commit suicide, to reduce the risk of recurrence of attempt to commit suicide. So this was a more medical perspective which was taken by the legislation. It's tried to establish that if somebody is committing suicide or attempting to commit suicide, they are not in the proper state of mind. That presumption should be there, and therefore they are in need of care, treatment, and rehabilitation, right? So we see the journey of why attempt to suicide is removed. It was always in debate through LCRs, from the 42nd LCR, through the high courts wanting to remove it, through the Supreme Court wanting to remove it in P. Rathinam versus Union of India. But then there is Giancor, which comes in, and a debate on right to die and right to life was brought in. Then again into the 210th LCR, it was suggested that it is deleted. Aruna Shanbag showed, unfortunately, a positive stance wherein you were allowed to have in some ways the right to die. And lastly, the Mental Health Care Act came in and said that if somebody is trying to take such an extreme step, there is going to be some kind of severe mental trauma that the person is going through. Only then will they do it. So 309 should not be charged on this individual, right? And instead, care, treatment, and rehabilitation must be given to such individuals. So we are done with 306, which was abatement of committing suicide. And then we have finished attempt to commit suicide. And now this is your bonus section. While attempt to commit suicide is removed under BNS, they have introduced another specific section, right? This section only deals with an attempt to commit suicide to compel or restrain exercise of lawful power by a public servant is in question, right? So where you are attempting to commit suicide so that you make a public servant do something which you want, and that can be either compelling him to do something or telling him to restrain from doing something which is a discharge of his official duty. We'll have a look at the section. Whoever attempts to commit suicide with the intent to compel or restrain any so compel means a act to make him do, or restrain means to stop him from doing any, restrain any public servant from discharging his official duty, that which he is bound to do, shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 year, or fine, or both, or with community service, which is the new punishment introduced in BNS. Right? Repeating the section, if you attempt to commit suicide with one intention only, that is to compel or to restrain a public servant from discharging his official duty, you shall be punishable under section 226 of BNS. Right? This is the new section which has been brought in. Attempt to commit suicide is gone, and this offense of attempt to commit suicide to compel or restrain exercise of lawful power has been introduced into BNS. So abatement of suicide retained, attempt to commit suicide removed, and this section, attempt to commit suicide to compel or restrain exercise of lawful power, has been introduced in the BNS. Okay, now lastly, we will come to the question, because this topic is so relevant in relation to the Atul Subhash or Subhash Atul case. We will have a short discussion now on that. Has anyone, unfortunately, has anyone seen the video which was posted by him? Can you raise your hands at least? Anyone? Okay. Some people have seen the video. It was a very disturbing video. And he starts off with mentioning how he feels very harassed. In fact, he says that because of this harassment, I am, taking this step. So, in fact, it almost felt like he had read the section, because he says that I'm so harassed that I'm ending my life. He goes on to enlist the sections that have been put on him. There are multiple sections, including murder. It also includes 498A. Of course, we all know that there was also a discussion on how much financial burden and financial strain because of the litigation, multiple litigations that he's had. He had, I think, 120 hearings is what he says in the video, and out of which 40 something he says that he has attended, and it has been a strain on him. And he specifically says that because of these things, I'm ending my life, because of these people, I'm ending my life. And he makes a specific statement. He says that I have no other thing, I have no other option. They have left me with no other option but to end my life. Now, because we have seen these three sections, the first one is abatement. He is clearly making statements that it is because of them and because of these circumstances. Lastly, he also mentions that He has been disallowed from having access to his son, not allowed to speak to his son. They were making a situation where, as a parent, he was not allowed to interact with his child. So, again, forms of harassments which he mentioned that he felt was so drastic that he had no other option but to take his own life. Another interesting part, in light of this section which is in front of you, that is 226, he requests the judiciary. So again, this person is trying to tell the judiciary how to do their job. Now, this is very debatable. Of course, we know that there are, men, some laws are not gender neutral and have affect men in a negative manner. And Atul Subhash is a very big example of that. Now, in that context, but can you, through this suicide, you are informing the government that you want these things done, right? And also remember our discussion that abatement of suicide does not mean harassment and he is feeling harassed so he's dying. Did they harass in a way, or did they harass with the intention and incitement so that you kill yourself? That is the question. Did they do it in a manner that it was required from them, that you, there, that mens rea was there, that you are so annoyed that you then take recourses, you take reactions? Or was it done by his family or the wife's family and the wife because she wanted certain things? These are the debates that come into Atul Subhash's case. Do you understand? So the discussion is about, yes, there is a video, he enlists things, he enlists what kind of harassment he's facing, but was the harassment done by the wife and her family with the sole objective that he should kill himself? Or was it done for harassment? And was that harassment so much that he had to have, it was annoying him so much that a reaction must come in from him, is one question. Second question is, he's in the end of the video almost instructing the government on how they should behave and respond. Is that the right way to go about justice? In fact, the section in front of us is talking about the contradictory. You should not be compelling a public servant to do or not to do something. Of course, he is wanting them to do something which is justice, but again, he's compelling them to do an action, right? So I feel that there is a coercive angle to Atul Subhash. And though there is a lot of harassment that he has faced, there are those typical cases, sections which are in favor of women that have been levied against him and could have been questionable whether or not should be levied uh, against him, is a debate. Yes, Arpit, you are right. This is a section for attempt. I'm just relating to the principle that where he has committed suicide, but you do see this angle that yes, many people attempt or commit suicide where they want a public servant to behave in a certain way. That's the only part that I wanted to highlight. Coming back to our lecture, it's and recapping what we have done: abatement of suicide. We started with understanding the basic of the sections. It's two parts, which is suicide and abatement of suicide. We referred to the landmark cases that have taken place, and these are very recent cases, and that's why I have discussed them. They are the two cases that I have discussed, that is the Jaydeep Singh case and also this case of Neeraj Singh, which was the Hindustan Unilever case, are all from 2024, Nipun Aneja's case. And then we moved on to attempt to commit murder, how it has been removed from BNS and why it was removed from BNS. A short discussion we did have as to how questions were asked on attempt to commit suicide. And lastly, we came to the introduction of a new section under the BNS, wherein if you attempt to commit suicide for compelling a restraining of a public servant in the official discharge of his duty, has now become punishable. With this, I feel I will be open to take questions.
Hi, if anyone has any questions. Ma'am, there's one question which says, now that attempt to suicide is no longer an offense under BNS, what about those cases which are pending, which started under the IPC?
Which started under the IPC. See, these are criminal laws, and criminal laws are prospective in nature, right? So they become applicable when the law becomes applicable, right? So 1st July it became applicable.
Yeah.
Post the section is operational. Okay, there is one question which I really wanted to answer because this is an interesting question. Whether suicide can be considered crime without victim. So this is a very interesting question because in suicide, the victim and the perpetrator are one person itself, right? And under English common law, in fact, even suicide was considered a wrongful act, right? It was considered a felony. The interesting part of suicide is even though it is a wrongful act because you harm, even if that harm is to yourself, you don't survive it. So the problem is, even if we do consider it a wrongful act, there is no person to punish. So yes, you are the victim and you are the perpetrator. And if the attempt to commit suicide is wrong, then even suicide is wrong. But the perpetrator doesn't survive, so there is no punishment. Right?
Anybody else has any questions? In the meantime, I'm sharing a link to our feedback form. Please do take out time to fill it up. I've also shared a link to our Judicial Services exam preparation course. Do take a look, and if you have any queries, you can call on the number or email us. I've also shared a suicide helpline number, National Suicide Helpline number, with languages, details, and hours of operation. Please do take note and share it along. If anyone else has any doubts.
There is one question. I would like to take it up if you don't mind, Kritika.
Yes, ma'am.
Since suicide typically involves only the individual and does not directly harm another person, other than the emotional impact on friends and family, many see it as a victimless act. There is a victim, the person itself. From his perspective, it is argued that the criminalizing suicide further victimizes the individual, especially considering the mental health factors involved. Instead of criminal penalties, the focus is increasingly on suicide prevention. Yeah, right enough. And as we know that the Mental Health Care Act has also encouraged that kind of mindset, right? And the court has also. I don't think there was a question at all in this.
With respect to the interplay of dying declaration and abetment to suicide, I think we'll take that up in the evidence class. It doesn't. If any other questions, if anyone has.
I'll just answer in short.
Sure, ma'am.
Dying declaration can play a role. In Jaydeep Singh's case, if I'm not wrong, no, it was in the case of Ude Singh. I think the dying declaration did play a role. It did play a role. The court did take cognizance. Where there were multiple dying declarations, then the court did not trust the evidence. So, but it does take cognizance. It does take into consideration. If that answers your question.
We'll just wait for another minute, ma'am, for other questions to arrive, if any, if someone's typing.
Yeah, there are somebody's asked a question in the question and answer chat.
Ma'am, it's the same.
But I just wanted to answer the second half. It does look into other circumstances. It does, right?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the webinar and for your insightful questions to make this session even more fruitful. Please do fill up the feedback form and please do take note of the suicide helpline number, which I've shared. If any query is there with respect to the course, feel free to call us or write to us on the email provided.